dad, a legacy of tenacity and Toastmasters. My dad was born poor in a time when I don't think most people were. He grew up on farming communities in Minnesota and North Dakota. When he was 5 years old, he had running water in his house, and that was the last time until high school. They had an outhouse until his senior year in high school. His two brothers and him attended a one-room schoolhouse. They shared bathwater. And up until my dad's oldest brother went off to college, they shared a double bed.
Man.
My dad, in 1954, remembers very well when they moved to Kalispell, Montana, because at that time, he and his brothers got to see their very first TV show. But his fondest memory of that trip was they were able to spend the night in a motel, and it had a shower. And even though they were in their mid to late teens, they squealed at feeling a shower for the first time in their lives. My dad was born poor, but he did not have a poverty mindset. In 1961, he married my mom he was in graduate school, putting himself through school. The only jobs that were available for the night shift were all in the lumber industry. And he applied at all three of those companies. And he returned to all three of those companies every day to see if there was an opening. And there wasn't. On his fifth day, he walked into the plywood company, and the personnel officer recognized him as having been there every day and came up to him and said, "You know, it's winter, and we won't be hiring again until spring, and even if something opened, your name is far from the top." And my dad said, "I need a job. I'm a hard worker, and you will not be disappointed when you hire me." He said, "I want to be available in case something happens and you need to fill a position in short order. So if you don't mind, I'll see you tomorrow." He couldn't believe when he saw the payroll officer turn around and say, "You know what? Somebody quit last night. Why don't you go down and talk to the foreman and see what he has to say?" So my dad went to the foreman and said, "The employment officer just sent me down here to talk to you about that job that just opened." The foreman said, "He did? You're pretty skinny." My dad said, "Yes, but I am a hard worker, and you will not be disappointed when you hire me." He got the job. Well, after the four of us kids were born, my dad was working for Minnesota Mutual while practicing for his actuarial exams. He'd passed several of his exams by now, and the vice president called him into his office and said, "You know, your exams are going really well, but you do not have much of a future." He said, "You have very poor speech." And my dad was shocked. Nobody had ever told him he had poor speech. He had no idea. The vice president said, "You know, I've never been there myself, but I've heard that there's a Toastmasters. I'm wondering if you should check it out." 2 weeks later, my dad was a proud member of King Boreas Rex Toastmaster Club of St. Paul, Minnesota. That was in 1968. My dad has been in Toastmasters ever since. Dad has given many speeches throughout his career. but the one he feels was the most important speech of his life was after he passed his 5th actuarial exam, along with another fellow. And to celebrate, the company threw a luncheon for them at the Minnesota Club. And present at that luncheon was the president of the company, the vice president of the company, and the chairman of the board. It was a rather copacetic luncheon, however rather boring, because this was a bunch of actuaries. The chairman of the board was about to dismiss everyone when the vice president said, the vice president who chided my dad about his speaking abilities, but also knew he was in Toastmasters, said, we shouldn't dismiss until we've heard from at least one of the Toastmasters, or one of the new actuaries in our group. Alton, why don't you say a few words? Little did he know, my dad, being a Toastmaster, spent a few hours the night before preparing a just-in-case speech. Nobody had stood up during that whole luncheon, but my dad stood up. And he said, I just want to tell you, I've finally reached a lifelong goal. I finally have more exams than children. And with that, the whole place burst into laughter. Dad thought his boss was going to roll right onto the floor. Dad's speech went on for a few minutes after that. But the president of that company and the chairman of the board knew who my dad was. And whenever they saw him down the hall from then on, it was, hello, Alton. My dad owned his own actuarial business for 25 years until he sold it to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And when he retired, he became a professional he taught professional training seminars. He taught them across the United States. He went and trained people on different subjects. He belonged to several service clubs and organizations, being the president of almost all of them. But the one that made the biggest impact on his life was Toastmasters International. In 2018, last fall, was his 50th anniversary with Toastmasters. And one of his proudest accomplishments was in 1999 when he became the district governor of Montana, overseeing all of the Toastmasters clubs in Montana. With his tenacity and his determination to succeed, and a life-changing encounter that got him involved in Toastmasters, my dad accepted his past, but created his own future. Thank you